Hi, George.
Hi.
Thank you so much for meeting me like this. I had some questions for you. Would you mind telling me the story, as far as your recollection is concerned, about how Askey became interested in combinatorics and orthogonal polynomials?
So basically his training was in classical analysis and special functions. So that really predates my interactions with him. He and I corresponded in probably 1969, 1970 over a couple of papers I'd written, one on the Q analogs of the Appel functions. And he invited me to attend an AMS regional meeting, a special session he was running that was held at Northwestern. And basically I'd written a long article for the SIAM Review on, or I guess I was writing it at the time, on applications of Q-series basically. And in it I mentioned Henry Gould's book on combinatorial identities and said I believed 85% of it at least could be, all of them could be reduced to 3 or 4 classical identities in hypergeometric series. Dick was so pleased with that, except he said it must be 95 to 98%. Anyway, we became friends over our recognition that combinatorial identities were best studied from the point of view of hypergeometric series. And I don't think that he had a significant, certainly orthogonal polynomials were a serious part of his interests long before I met him. The CBMS lecture series in 1974 at Virginia Tech, he invited me to, and his published monograph related to that series, basically I think recounts all of his interests in various questions and analysis, and in particular in applications of hypergeometric series, and obviously orthogonal polynomials played a significant role there. And after that, he ran a major conference at Wisconsin in 1975 that was on special functions, produced a large volume on special functions, and I was invited to that. And from there, he invited me to spend a year, 75, 76, at the Wharf, Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. And so he and I ran a seminar the whole year, and given our sort of distant interests, I remember saying to him at one time during the year that before I met you, I would not have known an orthogonal polynomial from a perpendicular one. And he responded, I fear to tell you what I thought a partition was. So each of us came at this basically in the world of ordinary and Q hypergeometric functions, each for different interests, but the whole seminar was devoted to basically a merging of these, and that was the beginning of writing the book Special Functions that dragged on over at least a 20-year period, and if it hadn't been for Ranjan Roy, there never would have been a book on special functions. But I think during that year is when, as he got more interested in what he termed the Q disease, obviously anyone getting interested in that starts to take an interest in Ramanujan, and so that the things that he wrote about integrals related to Ramanujan's work, I think, arose out of that year. So you asked me also how Askey's, obviously every so often orthogonal polynomials come up in my work, and so it's quite clearly owing to him that I'm even aware that orthogonal polynomials are coming up in my work, and he was a generous and gregarious mathematician. Gregarious and mathematicians seldom fit in the same sentence, but he was open and anxious to both find out what somebody is doing, anxious to see what connections he could make between things he was doing and encouraging others to do projects where he either had some interest or felt that there was something bigger going on. That's why he was a moving force behind the Digital Library of Mathematical Functions, and really campaigned for years before it actually came into existence that something like this was needed, and that the Bateman volumes were an original first step, but way out of date by the time he was taking an interest in it.
So how about the interaction with him and this French team that was doing the combinatorics?
So basically, my impression is that they mostly got in touch with him. I know that I was responsible for getting him to an Oberwolfach meeting where many of the French were involved, because I thought his analytic interests would intersect well with theirs. And so that was all during this year, 75, 76, when I was in Madison. Anyway, I mean, he had there was various Frenchmen that he loved and others that he didn't exactly love. So he was strong opinions about things, as were many of them. But he, I think that 75, 76 year was the beginning of interest in all of these things. That prior to that, he was very much a classical analyst.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you feel like his impression was about like these deriving combinatorial proofs of various aspects that he was already familiar with?
I think he was quite not only happy, but really excited about the idea that there was this interaction between these two subjects, because I think he believed, and I believe, that each feeds the other in significant ways.
Do you think there's a big future for that as well? More work to be done?
Oh, of course. I mean, things are being discovered all the time, and especially now that I don't know what role AI will play, but up to this point, the computer algebra packages have allowed things to be discovered and to be analyzed and developed that really during much of Dick's career would have been impossible. So that things are more and more wide open, and technology will play a significant role.
Great. Can you say a little bit about your knowledge of how Askey was influenced by the mathematics of Ramanujan?
So I'm sure this basically came up during the year that we were there, and especially that was the year in which I discovered the Lost Notebook on that trip to Europe that Doron Zeilberger referred to early in his talk. I mean, obviously he was aware of Ramanujan, but not interested in that until, as he says, the Q disease hit. So that really was when he took a serious interest. He, of course, was responsible for the commissioning of the Ramanujan bust, so that he took an interest from all sorts of points of view in terms of memorializing Ramanujan.
Right. So you basically got to witness his being introduced to Q series,
Yes.
and then sort of being taken over by it, because
Yes.
he must have completely succumbed to it.
I would say, to a large extent, yes, because certainly his significant papers written by him in the period after I left Madison definitely show the significant development of things, and his students Jim Wilson and Dennis Stanton, of course, carried on the ideas that had sort of been germinating in this seminar over the year.
Great. And just one more question. Can you say a little bit about how getting to know Askey and working with Askey has impacted your life and career?
So, obviously, there are direct effects in that I was involved in this collaboration on the book Special Functions for a very long time. An indirect effect, obviously, was the fact that he invited me to the Wharf Foundation for the year, and as Doron mentioned, there was this conference, it actually was in France, that I was invited to for a week in the spring of 1976. And I wanted sound academic reasons to stay in Europe so I could benefit from the lower airfares, because I was taking my wife and my two young daughters with me, so that it was going to be extremely expensive with 4 airline tickets. So that it made lots of sense to stay 3 weeks, and so that part of that time I knew there were manuscripts from the estate of G.N. Watson in the Trinity College Library, and so that was what I said was a valid academic thing to look at. And it was, of course, a great surprise that in these boxes was what turned out to be Ramanujan's Lost Notebook. So that in some sense is a very indirect effect of working with Askey. He and I, of course, were on the same team in the education wars, the calculus reform movement, and so on. And so we had lots of interactions with regard to all of that. And so it was great fun. One anecdote. And early on, Paul Halmas wrote an article for the focus of the MAA called The Calculus Turmoil. And it was basically a defense of traditional teaching of calculus, and quite a wholehearted defense of the traditional teaching. And I thought it was a wonderful article. And Halmas and I exchanged, this was early email days, so we had early email. One of my first email contacts was with Paul Halmas. Anyway, each of us said nice things about the other and so on. Anyway, I called up Dick and told him about this, and Dick, referring to Halmas's article, said, "I hated that article." And the reason I remember this is because adrenaline surged through my system, and then because I had praised it so fulsomely, and I tried to think, why would he say that? Well, either I had misread the article, or that he and I were going to have some real difference, and he's such a fierce competitor when it came to issues of education that I was not looking forward to the rest of the conversation. So I managed to stammer out, what didn't you like about it? He said, "I hated it. I cannot stand to agree with a single word Paul Halmas writes," and I agreed with every word in that article. So that's typical of Dick.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.